Yama and welcome everyone to our Yuwaya Ngarra-li Webinar, a community-led evidence-based approach to youth justice. To begin, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country. I'm joining you today from Gamilaroi country here in Walgett. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future and any Aboriginal person here today. We have a jam-packed webinar today, and after I quickly introduce the speakers, we'll get started. My name is Loretta Wetherell. I am a Gamilaroi woman from Walgett and the wellbeing lead of the Dharriwaa Elders Group, an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation in Walgett. Also joining us from the DEG is Zoe Sands, a Gamilaroi woman from Walgett and DEG's Water and Country Co-lead and River Ranger Project Officer. On the UNSW side, we have Senior Research Fellow Peter McGillivray and Kakadoon and South Sea Islander lawyer and researcher. Finally, we also have Samantha Rich, Project Manager, Housing, a Wiradjuri graduate of Architecture and researcher. The structure of the webinar reflects the way that we work in the partnership. It privileges the voices and expertise of community members, but invites the experts and researchers where it is needed. We call what we're doing today working out loud, being open about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we're going to do next. To begin with, I'll ask Peter to give a quick overview of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks so much, Loretta, and thank you everyone for joining today. At its heart, Yuwaya Ngarra-li is a partnership between the Dharriwaa Elders Group and UNSW. For those who haven't heard about our partnership before, it was built on a long-standing research collaboration that grew from a formal invitation that came after we finished that research in 2016 for UNSW to work alongside the elders in their vision for positive change in Walgett. And that vision really focused on Aboriginal children and young people, and that children and young people in Walgett can learn, work, be safe, supported, and thrive within a robust sense of belonging to their families, community, culture, and country. The Dharriwaa Elders Group identified this as an urgent priority for Yuwaya Ngarra-li as a partnership, and we identified the need to act immediately to reduce Aboriginal and young people's contact with police in particular, and the youth justice system, which also includes courts and young people being held in youth detention in both youth detention centres and also in police custody. More broadly, the purpose of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership is to take a holistic and multidisciplinary approach to improve the wellbeing, social, built and physical environment and life pathways of Aboriginal people in Walgett through evidence-based initiatives, research and capacity building. So one of the most important things to say at the outset about the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership is that the Dharriwaa Elders Group and the Elders Council is setting the vision and the agenda for the partnership. So as an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation, the DEG is leading the protocols, the priorities, the timelines and the terms of engagement, and is grounded in local cultural authority, relationships, trust and accountability directly to the Walgett Aboriginal community. UNSW's role is to support community priorities through research, evaluation, advocacy, quantitative data analysis, evidence building, and access to wider resources and networks. So when we talk about the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership guiding an evidence-based approach, we're not talking about importing solutions into the community. What we're actually talking about is building the evidence based around what the community have identified, and that this is community-led and shaped by the Aboriginal community-controlled organisations over time, because they've been building a deep understanding of what the experiences is at a community level. That's a really important distinction in our work. So the evidence work is there that we support and enable through the partnership is to strengthen community priorities and support accountability and to really build the case for long-term structural change. Thanks, Loretta.
Zoe, can you tell us the story of how the Youth Wellbeing Service came to exist?
Hi everyone. So for many years, the community in Walgett have been asking for accountability around their young people. One of the first steps of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li project was contributing to and delivering a youth justice forum that was held in Walgett at the community college in March 2018. The forum gathered community members, so there were young people, families, elders, and all critical services, organisations, and Walgett stakeholders, which included the police and legal and justice agencies. Together, they discussed the needs of Aboriginal young people that were at risk of entering or who already were in the justice system and possible responses. The responses identified at the forum were developed into the Walgett Action Plan for Children and Young People, with goals for the next 3 years, such as less than 10% of Aboriginal children and young people aged 10 to 17 from Walgett appearing in the Children's Court. The plan included strategies of relationship building, improving options for training, education, and employment, creating effective diversion options, and planning the long-term work that is required for success in this area. Also beginning in 2018 was the Youth Justice Working Group, which was then renamed the Walgett Holistic Working Group in 2020. The group had an ongoing focus on issues related to the youth justice system and processes, and also focuses on improving holistic outcomes. This includes identifying and addressing unmet needs in priority areas such as mental health, services for adolescents, improved school outcomes, training, jobs, and access to health services and recreation, social connection, access to cultural knowledge and practices through DG and Walgett-based family-centered activities. We have also been working directly with children since 2018 to improve their well-being and reduce contact with the criminal justice system. This included, from 2020 to 2022, well-being checks, including as part of our crisis response during COVID, which allowed us to build trust and connection, get to know their support needs, and provide support such as food vouchers, water, activity supplies, PPE, and access to school supplies and technology. We also help young people under youth justice supervision to manage their reporting requirements and participation in youth justice conferences. These wellbeing checks often acted as early intervention for emerging issues. In the beginning of 2023, the Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service, Aboriginal Legal Service, New South Wales ACT, and the DG have embarked on a collaboration, facilitated and supported by Yuwaya Ngarra-li, to design a new Walgett Youth Wellbeing Service for children and young people, informed by the Two River Pathway to Change model, which my colleague Peter will explain more on soon. The service's focus is an Aboriginal community controlled program that builds strong relationships with children and young people, families and carers in Walgett, working with relevant legal, health and other services to provide integrated and meaningful community care, enhance social and emotional well-being, and build connection to culture and country. We commenced activities with the service in late 2024 at our purpose-designed space at Gullamully on the main street of Walgett. My colleague Loretta will expand on what the Youth Wellbeing Service provides and how it has been received. But the development of Gullamully as the model of delivery resulted from us knowing we needed our own space that was young people and family-centered. a place where community knew they could walk through the door, not be judged, have a yarn and a cup of tea, and access support that if they needed it. Our colleague Sam will be able to tell us more about this space soon. The Two River Pathway model, which I briefly mentioned earlier, was one of the key outputs of this work. Peter, could you tell us more about the Two River Pathway to Change?
Yeah, thanks so much, Zoe. And thank you for actually laying out all of the work that's had to happen to create the conditions where the youth wellbeing service could emerge. And it really did begin in 2018 when the Elders Group was really clear that it held grave concerns about the ongoing impacts on children and young people in the community that was actually coming from things like loss of land and degradation and harms to country and to the river systems, and how this was impacting on the social and emotional well-being of children and young people and families in Walgett. Institutional racism, a structural determinant, which was having impacts upon access to education, the school, and was having impacts upon how urgently these issues were being treated by local government, state government, national government. All of this was having serious impacts on how local services and agencies were really responding to the alarm that was being raised by the Elders Group. And that really came to be displayed at the Youth Justice Forum that you mentioned in 2018. And what we heard really loud and clear in the forum was that community wanted accountability. And when community voices, young people themselves, parents of children and young people who were being excluded from school, when they talked about coordination, they were talking about agencies actually showing and sharing information to show that they were responding and actually taking action to solve some of these issues. And so by engaging these agencies in the mechanisms of the working group, the first iteration that focused on youth justice and the second iteration that was more holistic, that engagement actually built more accountability to understand the issues from a community perspective and from an ACO perspective. And all of that was enabled by the action plan for children and young people. But what we learned pretty quickly was that we couldn't wait for government agencies and big NGOs with funding to design and start implementing things. It just wasn't happening as quickly and as urgently as children in Walgett needed things to be done. And so the Elders Group really took that upon themselves to start developing some of these mechanisms. The first being the youth service that you led, Zoe, as project officer, which was very exciting. And your background in criminology absolutely helped to make that real and to address some of the systemic issues, but to build the youth service around wellbeing responses. So rather than just focusing on young people's contact with the criminal justice system, thinking about what the young person needed from a wellbeing perspective, and that made a real difference. But one of the things that we learnt through all of that process, so the Youth Justice Forum, the Action Plan for Children and Young People, the working group, and actually having a dialogue with government agencies, was that we needed a model, we needed a framework that everybody across the community was working towards in terms of the priorities and the ways of working that needed to be aligned. And so that led to the Two River Pathway to Change model, which the Dharriwaa Elders Group Council gave a language name in Gamilaroi. And it really says that if we're talking about working with children and young people who are being criminalized by government systems or even community attitudes to young people who are getting into trouble with the police because of boredom or other factors out of their control, that we need to find new pathways. We need to find ways to work directly with those children and young people in a paradigm that doesn't just treat them as young offenders. And so the Two River Pathway to Change model has three interlinked strategies. The first is to influence services and improve accountability of those services for children and young people. The second is to strengthen the engagement and leadership of Aboriginal community controlled organisations and families. So, that need to actually bring as many of the services and organisations into the work, particularly where they have funded services that to work with families in Walgett. And the third is to work intensively with children and young people to increase belonging, safety, and well-being, and reduce or prevent ongoing contact with the criminal justice system. That last one about working directly with children and young people is really important because in a working in place, it feels like an obvious one, but it's actually really surprising when you start to look at work that's funded, which of those funding contracts actually requires young people to be at the centre in ways where they are genuinely participating and leading the engagement, as opposed to a kind of case management style approach, which really pacifies the young person's participation. And the elders group approach is very different to that because it centers culture and it centers culturally led work with a young person. And so the youth wellbeing service is a model which makes real the working directly with children and young people. And I'm going to, we'll hear more about the detail of what the youth wellbeing service looks like. That's it from me now, Zoe. I'll pass back to you.
Yeah. Sam, you're one of our Yuwaya Ngarra-li project managers that enables and support our built environment vision. Can you tell us how you've supported the development of the youth wellbeing service?
Of course, thank you, Zoe. So I've been working on this topic since 2022, looking at the role of infrastructure to divert Walgett Aboriginal children and young people from the criminal justice system. And this involved scoping different buildings in town, which could support the Yuwaya Ngarra-li team's programs and specifically support children and young people programs. As the team know, there were many barriers to finding the right place, and it was quite an iterative process. We not only focused on new buildings, but we also looked at existing spaces for children and young people. But unfortunately, timing and things didn't align. However, in 2024, the DAG team found the Gallimali space, which was a formerly agricultural real estate retail space. So we had to redevelop it into a space that would support the team and also feel like a community place. So the team and I co-designed a space to support the team and the programs, which included, building new offices, rooms for meetings and quiet discussions, including gathering spaces that would support the programs and a large kitchen as well for the food sovereignty programs. So this space was renovated over a period of 6 to maybe 9 months, which was quite slow, but very common in remote contexts where you're really fighting for trades and things like that. So it moved very slowly to renovate the front building to create the ultimate kind of welcoming community space that we ended up with. And the literature and service providers show that, when we do have places like youth hubs or community spaces that are designed specifically for children and young people, they are an important part of the care continuum model, and they play a significant role to create a welcoming, safe, and accessible space. And it's also a great early intervention strategy. And it was amazing to see that and really evident that once the team had a space for their programs and activities, just how valuable it was to advancing their work and increasing the number of programs. And very quickly, the number of participants grew really quickly. And they also just made this amazing, vibrant, welcoming community space, which I wonder, Loretta and Zoe, would you mind talking about what your experience of what it meant to have a space of your own?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. Yeah, having a space of our own meant that community could come in and, use the facilities without being judged. Asking staff if they could, do printing, and also for the kids, having a safe place where the kids can do what they want and also be safe in that space. Zoe, do you have anything?
Yeah, so it's for like over the time. So unfortunately, our Gullah burnt down early December 2025, and since moving in and during that time, we saw the connection that the kids had to the spot, because when the place was burning down, the kids, they were coming up to us and saying, what are we going to do now? Where are we going to go? And there were kids saying, that's my favorite spot. So, having that space, we definitely created a welcoming community space for our community that, we're really proud of. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Zoe. And I think and thank you, Sam. It's so good to hear just exactly how the evidence and the research base is aligning with what the experience is at a community level. And that really important lesson that having infrastructure which is designed, the work being led by ACCOs and the community practitioners who are using the space. And I know that you worked really closely with the Gullah staff. And for everybody to know that the Youth Wellbeing Service is one of quite a few teams that are working out of the Gullah space, that all of that is really that's the holistic work in action right there. That's what makes it real. Zoe or Loretta, would you mind giving just a little bit of a brief update on where the Youth Wellbeing Service is currently being delivered from, while the Gullah space is being rebuilt, or the plans are on foot for the rebuild? And as part of letting us know where the Youth Wellbeing Service is delivered from now, what a good week in the Youth Wellbeing Service looks like. Maybe Loretta, if you...
Yeah, so currently we're in a space that is owned by the Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service. We're renting that space, and in that space too, the kids, they feel welcome, they feel safe, and they own it, I guess. They come in and just, it's their space, their happy space, I guess. But since we started offering the service in 2014, there's been really high community participation, and children and young people have been highly engaged, even requesting more activities. We have had nearly 400 attendees by young people aged 9 to 17 at our programs, and these young people also sometimes bring along children younger than 9. Our regular activities run for 2 hours, a couple of days a week, which is what we have resourced to support. But we often hear from young people that this is too short, that they want to stay later and come every day of the week. Just to give you an insight on how my week is, on a Monday, we collaborate with the Walgett Primary School, where kids come for an hour doing different activities. Tuesday, we have the youth group after school, 3 to 5 p.m. And Thursday is a big day. We have Sister and Bro speak from the Walgett Primary School, and then the youth group 3 to 5 in the afternoon. And on this particular day, we have a total of 45 young people that comes to Gullamully. Some of the kids that come, during Sister and Bro Speak, because they're coming out 3 to 5, they would often stay on. They don't go back to school. So just goes to show that they, love being at the youth group. Some of the activities we have offered in our after school and school holiday programs include regular cultural sessions with the DG River Rangers, and social and emotional wellbeing sessions with the Aboriginal Medical Service. We've had a cooking with native food session with Chef Mark Olive, an art workshop with the local artist Lakari Pit. We had a yellow belly workshop providing free haircuts and wellbeing yarns, and a footy gala day event in Garuga. Through these activities and continuing being there for young people, we built trust with them. This then achieves better engagement for outcomes in the community. Young people feel accountable because of the relationship we build with them, which are based in care and respect. We get better outcomes for both children and young people and community through building community care rather than excluding young people because they have made mistakes or done the wrong thing. This makes the service we provide different to traditional criminal justice and police-led responses. A big part of that is us being local, Aboriginal, and there is community trust. Sam, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Loretta. So I just wanted to ask Loretta and Zoe, what matters most to the success of the youth wellbeing service from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Relationships and trust. We are local and Aboriginal, and there is trust in us. The young people class us as family. We grew up with their parents. They know we listen and act on what they tell us. The relationship reduces barriers and shame in accessing support. Parents, carers value the way that the staff interact with the kids and get involved in the activities. Gullamully staff are not just supervising the kids, they are letting them be who they want to be, dancing and other things. They value teaching the kids life skills. Culture, we ensure that young people stay connected with their culture as this brings a sense of belonging. Our young people are very proud of who they are, so we want to make sure that it continues throughout the Gullamully space. Elders' vision, we have not lost a vision as it is passed through generations through advocacy and protesting. We respect and recognise their decades of work, knowledge and expertise working locally for the Aboriginal community. We value our ancestors, elders, and keep the fire burning. Zoe.
So flexibility and responsive leadership. We have collected ideas and feedback from children and families right from the beginning. Parents, carers value that it is genuinely led by young people. We respond to feedback from children and families around everything to do with the program, the space, and the way we work. We regularly reflect on our program and adapt them as things change. The space. Gullamully provides a space for community to access support. They can walk through the door, not get judged, and have a yarn and cup of tea. There is growing confidence to come in, feel relaxed, and make the space their own. And we do see this with our kids. They know they can just get up, get something to eat, get something to drink. Community can just walk in, they walk straight to the kettle and make a cup of tea and, start yarning to everyone. Another one is accountability. It is not outside influences. It is community telling us what to do. Our funders bring to life what the community has asked for over very many years. We are doing it in the community way. We are accountable for all that we do. We listen to the young people, making sure that they have a voice, and being led by the young person. And we also ensure that all staff, whether they are in another program or providing a different service, understand how to work with our young people. Pete, I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks so much, Zoe and Loretta, for laying out some of those really important ingredients for success, because I think what I heard in all of that was just how strengths-based this model is, and that when you can see the enormous strengths in every single community and work in a way that actually embraces those strengths, there is so much opportunity to do this work in many different places and in many different communities when you're working in a community-led way. So thank you for detailing all of that for us. I wanted to ask all of us to share what surprised us in the years that we've been doing this work now. Maybe what we feel or have seen hasn't worked well and how we've responded to that. Because there's been lots of that, lots of, when you're doing this work for income, there is always stuff that doesn't work, and we have to pivot and find solutions and problem solve that. And as part of that, what we're still figuring out. So in the spirit of working out loud, just inviting all of us to share a bit of what surprised us, what hasn't worked, and what we're still figuring out. Loretta, can I throw to you first?
Yeah. What surprised us, that agencies, organisations and peaks that are not based in Walgett continue to disagree the work that's being led by long-standing echoes such as DEG. Some very basic protocols of independently learning from and about the work that's happening aren't followed. There is a real capability gap of many working in government and non-government sectors that aren't doing their due diligence. Often from assumptions that work isn't happening, these assumptions need some critical reflection and those interests these assumptions are serving. And what we're still figuring out is how to continue to develop and grow pathways and the meaningful diversion elements of the youth wellbeing service when funding is targeted at initiative which understand children and young people as either youth offenders or at risk of being youth offenders. It's incredibly limiting when we are building responses that are strength-based, culturally led and holistic and uses strategies other than enforcement when working directly with children and young people. So Pete, I'll pass that back to you.
Thanks, Loretta. Zoe, can I ask you to talk a little bit about the Rivers Rangers program and what you're seeing in that part of the work that you're leading?
Yeah, so as part of the River Rangers, we do monthly activities with the Youth Wellbeing Service, and I think it's really good that we have a youth service that kids are really comfortable in, because it also makes, I don't know if I'm being a bit selfish saying this, but makes us, out of the Rangers, it easier to work with our kids. It's in Walgett, I'm just going to use an example as the high school. They have a high turnover of principals. So they are constantly changing their principals like every 6 months. So this then puts more work on us to go to the high school. We have to explain, our program over and over again. We have to, create that new relationship, and, just sometimes it just doesn't work. So having our youth wellbeing service, just makes everything a lot easier to work with our kids. And yeah, we're still learning in the youth, like with the rangers and the kids, because they do love being outside, but what we do as rangers can be not as fun to kids, I think. So it's just, yeah, we're still learning how to make things a lot funner for the kids to do.
On that bit, Loretta, if I can throw to you again, just to talk about how you listen to young people, and what they say that they want to do. For example, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what they're asking for and a bit more about that?
Yeah, the kids sure do tell us what to do and how to do it, and it's great because that's what we're there for, listening to kids, listening to the young people, and doing what they want. They want more fun activities. For example, this week I asked in one of the youth activities, I asked if they could write down the 50 years of deadly things happening in Walgett, and the kids reckon that's just like school. So, so I'm not going to do that type of activity with them again, because they think, it's just like school. So either they want to do fun activities. So yeah, so whatever they ask, I guess I have to deliver. And
One of
in
the
that,
thing, one of the things that I've heard you say before is that um, sometimes there's a perception that it has to be really complicated, or the activities have to be, big, fancy, extravagant things. But often young people are asking for very simple things, right?
yes, one young girl asked if she can do knitting. I can't knit. I don't know how to knit. I don't know how to crochet. But I've bought some knitting supplies. And then what I do, I learn how to do it. I do some YouTube's videos just so that I can, sit down and show the kids. Or I will ask one of the staff members if they know how to do this or do that. If they can do it for me. Like we have, two staff members that are really good artists. So I usually run to them to paint with the kids, because kids love to paint. Yeah, so it's like using all the resources and staff that I have to do these activities, and it could be just going to the river with the rangers. We have one little young person that comes weekly and used to come every day, and he, in one little story he told me, he was like, I want to show you where me and the boys went. And it was, he showed me where they went, and I just said, you need to be careful. You can't come to the river by yourselves, you and your little friends. And he was like, no, not my friends, the rangers. So he calls the rangers the boys, like, because they're all boys, like all men. So, you know, just having different staff that work in different areas is a bonus as well. Um, yeah, and
Yeah,
just
so
and I guess just being there and being with other kids and having fun, and just being themselves, I guess. Yeah.
one of the things that I've also heard you talk about as being a surprise, and also something that keeps coming up that's a bit of a barrier, is adults in community having perceptions or attitudes about children and young people being good kids or bad kids, and that those labels can be really isolating for young people, and that through Gallimully and the Youth Wellbeing Service, you're really trying to disrupt those labels and the stigma of that's put on children and young people who are being criminalized by some of the way that young people get talked about at a community level. Is that something that, yeah, I just wanted to get your views on that and how much of a problem that is.
Um. Well, at Gallimully, there is no bad or good kids. They're just kids being kids, and we don't class them. If one kid is doing something they shouldn't be. We don't, say, time out. We just talk to them and let them know that you can't do that, next time. And I guess
because they're still learning. So it's like, if you sit down and you tell them this is wrong, they're still in their learning phase. So it's, just part of their learning that we're helping them with.
And I guess too, we respect them and we talk to them. We want them to talk to us. So it's like,
role modeling.
Yeah, and in my eyes, my personal opinion, no kid is bad and good. Every kid is the same, but just have unique ways, just in their own way, I guess.
Thanks so much, Loretta. I just wanted to also check in with Sam. From your vantage point, what surprised you and in the work that you're doing around the built environment, what's not worked and how have you responded to that?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think just kind of reiterating some of the things that Loretta and Zoe have already said about, I guess, barriers, particularly when we were still trying to find places to run the programs out of, just the barriers that come from, places like the council, for example, that you think would be supportive of this type of work and, not, putting barriers in place, whether or not they are real or just, barriers around kind of wanting an ACCO to grow within the community has been really surprising. And then I think, we've been really fortunate that we've been able to, bypass some of those barriers eventually by, getting the Gallimali space. And the fact that an ACCO has to kind of, go and find a location and, find funding to support the acquisition and purchase of a building rather than being able to rent in town, I think is a massive barrier. Particularly when as soon as they had that space, they made it their own and it was so successful and contributed so much. It contributes so much to the community. So I think that's a massive one. And then while we've been growing, just the lack or the barriers around obtaining funding to build, really good community infrastructure by these organizations, these ACCOs that really know what is needed in the community and work really closely with the community. We've done lots of sessions with different staff members, but, just kind of drawing upon what they were just talking about, one quote that sits with me really strongly and always did was that they're not bad kids. They just need love and respect. And so I think it's not a surprise, but I think it's really amazing that, even before I got stuck into the research, I already had the fundamental elements of what was needed, and that was from the community. And actually, the research just was further backing to what the community told me that they needed. So I think, that to me is really amazing. And the fact that, as soon as they got their own space, it flourished. And I was like, that is the greatest gift as somebody that kind of creates spaces is like that facilitation and seeing them thrive as soon as they had a space that supported what they wanted to do.
Thanks so much, Sam. And just to pick up something that you've said and also that Loretta said about what we're still figuring out, which is how to continue to develop the youth wellbeing service to create those meaningful pathways into education, back into the supports which makes education accessible, and to advocate for that and for that to be heard by government systems. because what's still surprising is the reluctance to embrace community care as a legitimate response to young people having interactions with the police. So the quote that you beautifully set out for us, which says that we don't need enforcement strategies, we need support and love and community care. And in this work, I've just been perhaps surprised by the reluctance to be willing to explore those options and to fund those options, and not a great deal of critical reflection about what might be, why we might be holding on to some of these enforcement strategies where all of the evidence shows that an earlier response, a more meaningful response, and one that's community led gets far better outcomes. What are we still getting from some of these other strategies which are more police led? What is that? And I guess we're still yet to see any compelling evidence that those options work. In fact, increasingly there's evidence that police-led options don't get the outcomes that any of us want to see. So there's still quite a bit to figure out, but there's lots of incredible work that's being led by the Dharriwaa Elders Group with that vision and the research and evidence base that is informing and allowing us to evaluate and measure and reflect and document what we're seeing to get even better outcomes for children and young people. So, in the last little bit of time we have together, one of the things that we wanted to share as part of the Working Out Loud of the webinar was a little bit about the elements of the Walgett Youth Wellbeing Service that can be used by other Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in place in communities that are grappling with some of these same systemic issues that are contributing to such poor outcomes for children and young people. And so I wanted to ask Loretta, Zoe, Sam to share a little bit about what you think the elements of the Youth Wellbeing Service that might be useful to other ACCOs and communities. Loretta, can I start with you first?
Yep, thanks, Pete. From what we've heard, some of the key elements of the model are place-based and community control. The local expertise and trust we have makes us the best people to be providing services to our children and young people. Relationship driven, local Aboriginal women and men are the community practitioners. Trauma aware and culturally grounded. Flexible and responsive. Because we're local and on the ground, we are able to adapt quickly when circumstances change or things happen. Integrated with local services, we have a great relationship with our local service providers such as the Walgett Aboriginal Medical Service, allowing us to work together and play to each other's strengths to achieve the best outcomes for children and young people, their families and community.
This fits into broader systems through youth justice, diversion, early intervention and prevention, health and well-being. We know from our expertise and the evidence that building environments where young people can thrive is, by its very nature, holistic. Just addressing one factor in a child or young person's life will not create sustainable long-term change and requires a community-led response in key areas such as youth justice, diversion, health, housing, education, and employment. I'll hand over to Sam.
I don't know what else to say after those lovely finishing points. I just think, I guess if you're working with somebody with my background, making sure that they trust, and respect the community knowledge. And I think that has always been really important in working with the Dharriwaa Elders Group, as well as being really flexible to respond to what is needed and what they're looking at, and be able to kind of get rid of an idea or a pathway they don't think that it's a good one. So that, flexibility and responsiveness, and don't underestimate the impact of, local community spaces with the right people in it is probably what I would add. Pete, did you want to add as well?
Yeah, for me, in the work that I do that looks at community-led models of working with children and young people in place, it's really clear that, from my perspective, that local Aboriginal staff that are already leading work to address the systemic issues is the really critical element to building what works. So, and there's always a role for everyone who's up for participating and to being involved. Everyone has a role. So being inclusive and the leadership of local Aboriginal women in the Dharriwaa Elders Group, Zoe, Loretta, Vanessa Hickey, our colleague who is the community response lead at Gullamully. You can really see that the local Aboriginal staff who are doing this work relationally in a culturally led way really are the engine room of all of this. So for me, that's the key element, and models and approaches which really supports and enables that leadership, whether it's formal or informal, really makes all of the difference. And the Dharriwaa Elders Group and Gullamully, in writing up the youth wellbeing service model, will be able to share more detail about that in particular, because it does require meaningful long-term commitment of resources. And we know that from a government perspective, from a philanthropy perspective, there's lots of opportunities to support and enable the growing of really strong leadership in place by Aboriginal workforces and community practitioners. So I will pass back to Loretta.
Thank you, Pete. So our final reflection from Gullamully is that I'm happy for the space that we created for our young people in Walgett. The young people love the space. They treat it with respect. They don't just treat the space with respect, but also the staff. And looking forward to the future, we have big plans that our kids have designed, and also continue to listen to our young people on what they want and their needs. So this is an ongoing work. Stay connected with us and appreciate everyone joining.
Deadly, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.